If I close my eyes, I can still smell the summer of 1993, the dust, the sweat, the faint sweetness of mango blossoms fighting to survive the heat. Pune was a city caught between old habits and new beginnings then. Streets buzzed with rickshaws, vendors, and laughter that carried farther than it should have in the choking air. For me, 17 and restless, that laughter sounded like another world. The day my father died, the sky was the same color as boiled milk. He'd gone to work early at the paint factory, just like always. By afternoon, a man from his shift showed up at our door with his cap in his hands and that look people get when they're about to break your heart. The machine had jammed. He'd tried to fix it. I don't remember much after that, only my mother's scream and the silence that followed it, like the whole house had stopped breathing. Mom, Sarita, was 38 then. Pretty, but tired looking. People said she was strong, but strength and exhaustion often wear the same face. For months after the funeral, she lived like someone underwater, cooking, cleaning, breathing, but never really surfacing. The rent was overdue, the bills piled up, and every conversation we had ended with, "We'll figure it out." When she remarried a year later, everyone called it sensible. A woman alone with a teenage daughter, the neighbors whispered. "It's not safe. She's lucky." Lucky. I hated that word. Vikram Rao was the kind of man who took up too much space in a room. He owned paint stores across the city, wore ironed shirts, and spoke like he was always teaching someone a lesson. At the wedding, he bent down smiling wide and said, "You're a smart girl, Asha. I'll make sure you stay that way." It sounded like a promise, but it wasn't. We moved into his house in Sadashiv Peth, a 2-story building with clean white walls and a mango tree in the courtyard. That tree was the only thing that felt kind. I used to sit under it, reading, pretending the world outside the gate was still mine. The first few months weren't bad. Mom seemed lighter, cooking fancy meals, smiling again, calling him Vikramji with the same careful tone people use when they don't know if they'll be answered kindly. He bought me new notebooks, a desk, even a bicycle. But his eyes lingered too long on what I wore, how I sat, how long I stayed out. "Girls should be home before sunset," he'd say. Mom laughed it off then. "She's studying hard, Vikram. She's a good girl." He smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile that made you feel safe. Books can't protect a girl's reputation. That was the first shadow that crossed our new home. The laughter faded after that. First Mom's, then mine. By winter, the house had changed. You could feel it in the air. Heavier, quieter, like the walls were listening. Vikram made rules for everything. What time I should come home, who I could talk to, how long the curtains stayed open. He said it was for my safety, but it felt like a slow disappearance. "Discipline makes a person respectable," he'd say. Respectable. Another word that didn't mean what it sounded like. Mom adjusted quicker than I did. She spoke less, smiled less. I'd catch her flinching at sudden noises, pressing her palms together as if praying for peace. At night they argued in whispers, the kind that still managed to cut through the walls. Sometimes I'd hear the crash of a glass, sometimes just silence. He cut the telephone line one morning. "Too many useless calls," he said. Then he forbade visitors. My best friend Meena came by once, bold and cheerful as ever. He met her at the gate. "My daughter doesn't need friends," he told her. "She needs focus." After that, I stopped expecting normal. Every night I'd sit under the mango tree, listening to the leaves rustle. It was the only sound that didn't belong to him. One evening I came home 10 minutes late. The bus had broken down. The power was out, the house lit only by a lantern in the courtyard. He was sitting under the tree, smoking, waiting. "Traffic?" he asked, his voice calm in a way that made my stomach twist. "Yes," I whispered. "Buses don't take 10 minutes." He stood, flicking his cigarette to the ground. "You think I don't know where you go?" My throat tightened. "I'm not lying." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Don't ever make me doubt your word again." he said quietly, stepping closer. The smell of smoke and paint clung to him. Do you understand? I nodded. Mom found me crying that night. I tried to tell her, but she just said, "He's strict, that's all. Men are like that. You'll see." I wanted to ask if my father had ever made her this afraid, but I didn't. The letter came in April, in a plain brown envelope. I'd been waiting weeks for it. A scholarship to study architecture in Mumbai. I tore it open in the courtyard right under the mango tree, sunlight spilling through the leaves. "Congratulations, Miss Naik," it began. "You've been selected for admission." I read it over and over, my hands shaking. It was freedom. Maybe the only one I'd ever have. That evening I showed it to Mom while Vikram was out. She smiled for the first time in months. "You did it," she said, hugging me tightly. But he found it later, on the table. "What's this?" he asked, waving the letter like it was a crime. "My scholarship," I said, heart pounding. "I got in." He tore it in half. "You think you can run away to Mumbai and disgrace this family?" "Vikram," Mom started, but he turned on her. "Hard work doesn't make a girl respectable," he shouted. "You want her living alone among strangers?" The silence after that was worse than the shouting. Mom looked at me, then at him. "Let her go," she said softly. "Please." He stared at her like she'd spoken another language. Then he turned to me, voice low. "You're not going anywhere. You'll learn your place." That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan, the shadows of mango leaves swaying across the wall. I made my decision before morning. When Vikram left for his store the next week, I packed quietly. My notebooks, some clothes, the torn letter folded neatly in my bag. Mom stood by the door, pale but steady. "You'll go to your uncle's in Mumbai," she said. "He'll keep you safe." I hesitated. "He'll hurt you." She smiled faintly. "He already does." We didn't cry. There wasn't time for that. I left through the side gate, the one beneath the mango tree. Its branches brushed my shoulder as I passed, like a blessing, or maybe a goodbye. That night, Vikram's anger could be heard down the street. The next morning, Mom called from a payphone. Her voice was calm. "Be free," she said, and hung up. I cried for the first time in years. It's been 12 years since that summer. I'm 30 now, an architect living in Mumbai. Mom lives with me in a small apartment with bright blue walls and too many books. She still makes tea the way she used to when I was little, strong and sweet, with a touch of cardamom. I went back to Pune once for work. The house on Sadashiv Lane was still there. The walls were cracked, the paint fading. But it was the absence that hit me hardest. The mango tree was gone, replaced by a concrete parking shed. I stood there for a long time, remembering the girl who sat under that tree, terrified to speak. I used to think survival meant silence. Now I know it means speaking, even when your voice trembles. Some wounds never fade, but neither does the strength that comes from walking away. True freedom begins where fear ends. I used to think peace had a sound. For me, it was the hum of the washing machine on a quiet Sunday, or the sound of my daughter, Ella, singing in her room while the sun came through the lace curtains. Our house on Waimari Road looked like every postcard version of home. White fence, neat rows of roses, a garden shed that smelled like soil and glass. From the outside, we were doing just fine. But peace is tricky. It can hide the tremors beneath the floorboards. Peter and I had been married for 22 years. He was a postal worker, proud of his precision. He woke up at 5:30 every morning, poured his coffee, 2 sugars, no cream, and read the newspaper before leaving exactly at 6. I used to find comfort in that rhythm. I'd joke that I could set the clocks by his footsteps. But over time, the routine became a wall between us instead of a foundation. It started when his hours were cut back. Money got tight, and Peter's predictability hardened into something colder. He began keeping track of every expense, lining up bills by date and color-coding envelopes. At dinner, he'd glance at the clock before I served the plates. If it was a minute past 6, his jaw would tighten. "Time is money, Margaret," he'd say without looking at me. You waste one, you waste both. I'd nod, apologize, and promise to do better. But the truth was I was exhausted. From the florist shop, from pretending everything was okay, from being the glue that never stopped holding. Ella, 15 and sharper than she let on, learned to read the silence. She knew the difference between her father's quiet and his temper. If a chair scraped too hard against the floor, she'd stay upstairs. If the kettle clicked off, it meant the storm had passed. By winter, I started spending more time in the glass shed at the back of the yard. I told everyone it was for my orchids, but really it was the only place I could breathe. I'd sit there long after dark, trimming leaves that didn't need trimming, whispering to the plants as if they might whisper back. One night, Ella found me crying over a broken pot. "What happened, Mom?" she asked, her voice trembling. I blinked hard, forcing a smile. "He said I water the roses too much." Maybe he's right. Maybe I ruin everything I touch. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away gently. "Go inside, sweetheart. It's cold." That night, when I finally came in, the kitchen clock read 11:47. Peter was asleep on the couch, bills spread across his chest like a shield. I stood there a long time, wondering when the house had stopped feeling like home. It happened on a Saturday, the kind of gray, heavy day where the sky looks tired of holding itself up. Ella had needed paints for a school art project. Nothing fancy, just a few brushes and watercolors. I bought them after my shift at the florist, thinking Peter wouldn't mind. $15 didn't seem like much to spend on your child's dreams. When he came home and saw the receipt on the table, he didn't yell. Peter never yelled. He simply picked up the paper, looked at it for a long moment, and said, "We can't afford this." "She needed them," I said softly. "I said no extras until I'm back full time." "It was $15, Peter." He didn't answer. He just walked to the cabinet, took down his coffee mug, the same one he used every morning, and dropped it. It shattered across the floor, porcelain skidding into the baseboards. The sound made Ella flinch. Peter looked at the shards, then at me. That's what happens when people don't listen. He turned and walked upstairs. I knelt, shaking, and started picking up the pieces. One cut into my palm, but I didn't stop. I pressed the fragments into my hand until I saw tiny beads of red. "Everything breaks if you hold it too tight," I whispered. Ella came down a few minutes later, silent as a ghost. She didn't say anything, just grabbed a broom and helped me sweep up the pieces. I wanted to tell her it was going to be okay, that things would get better, but I didn't believe it anymore. That night, I slept in the guest room for the first time in our marriage. The bed smelled like dust and forgotten summers. I stared at the ceiling and wondered when love had turned into fear. After that night, something inside me unraveled. Slowly, silently, I stopped eating with them. Peter didn't ask why. We became two ghosts orbiting the same house. I'd wake before dawn just to walk through the garden while the world still felt soft and untouched. The roses had started to wither, and I couldn't bring myself to prune them. It felt cruel to cut something that was still trying. The shed became my refuge again. I started collecting things. Bits of broken china, coins, dried petals, even small stones from the riverbank. I put them in glass jars, one for each memory I couldn't shake. To anyone else, it would have looked like clutter. To me, it was proof that broken things could still be beautiful. One evening, Ella came to the shed holding 2 mugs of cocoa. "Mom," she said, handing me one, "you're scaring me." I looked up from my jars. "Why?" "You don't talk anymore. You don't even look at Dad." I forced a laugh. "Some silences are safer than words." She frowned. "He's not going to change, is he?" I didn't answer. A few weeks later, I didn't go to work. I called my boss and said I was feeling off. The truth was, I couldn't face another day arranging flowers for people who still had joy to celebrate. The walls of the house seemed to hum with Peter's quiet disapproval. Every clink of a dish, every footstep, every sigh felt like a violation. I learned to move softly, to disappear in plain sight. Then came the morning I didn't remember leaving. The police said they found me walking barefoot along the Avon River, holding one of my jars. When they asked what I was doing, I told them I was returning what was taken. I remember their puzzled faces. I remember the sound of the water, soft and endless. They called it an acute stress reaction. I called it forgetting how to live. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and rain. Hill Morton was quiet, sterile, safe, but too safe, like a place that forgets what life feels like. I spent the first 3 days barely speaking. My hands twitched for the feel of soil. The doctors were kind but distant, speaking in words like exhaustion and coping mechanisms. I didn't correct them. How do you explain that silence had been your only language for years? Peter came once. He sat by the bed, staring at the floor. "You need rest," he said. "I need air," I whispered. He didn't answer. He just stood, adjusted his jacket, and left. I watched him walk down the hallway and disappear behind the automatic doors. Ella visited every day. She'd bring me small things, photos, letters, wildflowers from the garden. "I watered your orchids," she said one afternoon. "They're still blooming." I smiled faintly. "Good. They always were better in your hands." When they finally sent me home 2 weeks later, the house was spotless, sterile. The shed door was locked. I didn't ask for the key. Peter went back to work quieter than ever. I began moving through the days like someone watching herself from a distance. Ella started packing for college. She was ready to leave. Maybe she'd been ready for years. The morning Ella left for university, I stood by the car and tried to memorize her face. The sunlight in her hair, the faint tremor in her smile. "Don't worry about me," I told her. "You've got your whole life ahead." She hugged me tight. "I'll call every day." "I know," I said, "but don't stay too close to the past. It's heavier than it looks." After she drove away, I walked to the shed and unlocked the door for the first time in months. Dust motes swirled like tiny ghosts. My jars still lined the shelves, each one glinting faintly in the morning light. I picked up the one that had been in my hands by the river, rose petals and bits of broken china inside. I held it to my chest and whispered, "You can still grow around what breaks you." That night, I left the jar on Ella's bed, wrapped in a scarf. I didn't leave a note. But when she unpacked at her dorm, she'd find it. A piece of me, fragile and imperfect, but still shining. The next morning, I went outside to water the roses. They were blooming again. Some stems bent under their own weight, but they were alive, reaching toward the sun. For the first time in years, I took a deep breath and didn't feel afraid. Love should never silence you. When control replaces compassion, when fear replaces trust, it's not love, it's survival. Sometimes healing doesn't mean fixing what's broken, but learning to grow around it, just like roots finding light through cracked soil. And in that quiet, fragile growth, you find yourself again. Long before I learned the truth about my family, I believed we were perfect. We lived in a white 2-story home with navy shutters and a mailbox my father polished every Sunday morning. My mother, Helen, was the kind of woman who baked pies that looked like magazine covers and arranged flowers so precisely it seemed a sin to touch them. My father, Mark, was charm incarnate. Handshakes firm, smile gleaming, his laughter warm enough to melt strangers into friends. To the outside world, we were the portrait of happiness. Inside, we were glass. Beautiful, but one crack away from shattering. Our lives ran on schedule. Dinner at 6 sharp, church every Sunday. Chores done before play. My mother's watch was her second heart, ticking louder whenever my father was near. He liked control, and we mistook it for love. If my napkin wasn't folded right, his eyes would narrow. If Mom overcooked the roast, he'd set his fork down and sigh. A small sound, but it could stretch for hours. Silence became our family's second language. I was 9 the first time I noticed something wasn't right. Mom had worn a scarf to church on a warm spring day. When I asked about it, she smiled and said she'd caught a chill. Later, while helping her in the garden, I saw the edge of a purple bruise beneath the fabric. She froze when she noticed my stare. "Some things," she whispered, "aren't meant to be talked about." Then she patted my hand as if her touch could erase the color from her skin. At night, I'd hear them through the vents. His voice low and angry, hers trembling, apologizing for things I didn't understand. Then the apologies would stop, replaced by the sound of dishes shattering or the hollow slam of a door. I'd bury my head under the pillow, praying morning would come quickly. On the surface, nothing ever changed. We smiled for family photos, brought casseroles to potlucks, waved at neighbors. But each act felt rehearsed, like lines in a play we couldn't stop performing. My father liked to remind us, people are watching. Don't forget who you represent. I didn't understand it then, but what he really meant was, don't ruin my image. That year, my mother started collecting angel figurines, small porcelain things with delicate wings and kind faces. She said they brought peace. Every time my father lost his temper, I'd find her dusting them afterward, her hands shaking. "They remind me to believe in good," she told me once. I wanted to believe in it too. But every night that belief felt thinner, stretched like glass ready to break. By the time I turned 12, dinner had become a ritual of performance. The table was always set perfectly, cloth napkins folded like swans, silverware gleaming, candles unlit but waiting. My father's moods dictated everything. If he walked in whistling, the night might pass quietly. If he came home silent, a storm was brewing. One Tuesday, he came home late. The air smelled of whiskey even before he hung up his coat. Mom's hands twitched as she placed the roast on the table. "You're late," she said softly. He smiled thinly. Traffic. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Or maybe someone's been gossiping about me again? I didn't understand what he meant, but Mom's face went pale. "No one's talking about you, Mark. Everyone talks." He took a sip of water, then slammed the glass down hard enough to make it jump. Especially when someone doesn't know her place. The roast grew cold while they argued in quiet tones sharp as knives. I stared at the clock, counting seconds, wishing them away. Then the crash came, the sound of a plate hitting the wall. I jumped. My mother flinched but didn't cry. That was her strength. She never gave him the satisfaction of tears. That night I heard her sobbing through the vents again. Only this time I pressed my phone against the floor register and hit record. I don't know what made me do it, fear, anger, maybe both. But I needed proof that our perfect home wasn't perfect at all. At school the next day, my teacher noticed my silence. "You okay, kiddo?" she asked. I handed her my phone with trembling hands. She listened, her eyes darkening, and said nothing. By evening, blue and red lights danced across our front lawn. I watched through the window as officers led my father away, his face pale with fury, my mother clutching her robe like armor. For the first time I saw her breathe, really breathe, as if the air was hers again. The house felt empty after he was gone, but it wasn't peace, it was aftermath. The silence that once frightened us now hummed like a ghost. Mom tried to fill it with small noises. The radio, the hum of the dishwasher, her soft singing while she cleaned. She smiled more, but her hands still shook. The neighbors whispered. Some brought casseroles, others brought questions. "We had no idea," Mrs. Dalton said. "He seemed like such a good man." Mom just nodded. No one really wanted the truth. They wanted reassurance that their own lives were safe. I slept better mostly. But sometimes I dreamed he'd come back, his footsteps echoing down the hall. I'd wake sweating, heart pounding, convinced I heard the front door creak. Mom would find me on the couch, curled up with the lights on. "He can't hurt us anymore," she'd whisper, holding me tight. I wanted to believe her. Years passed, but trauma doesn't leave quietly. By high school, Mom worked 2 jobs. She never dated, never went out, and still wore long sleeves no matter the season. I tried to be strong for her, but sometimes I saw the old fear flicker in her eyes, especially when someone raised their voice. We rebuilt our lives slowly. Therapy helped. Church helped less, though people meant well. I learned to speak up, to say when something felt wrong. I promised myself I'd never become like him. But anger is a tricky inheritance. It seeps through cracks if you don't guard against it. I had to learn that control wasn't strength and silence wasn't peace. Now, years later, I'm 26. I live in a quiet apartment with no ticking clocks and no rules about dinner time. Mom visits sometimes. She's older, gentler, but still flinches when doors slam too hard. We talk about everything except the years we lost. Sometimes I drive by our old house. A new family lives there now. Toys scatter the yard. Laughter spills through open windows. It's the kind of sound we never had, and it fills me with both sorrow and hope. Perfection is a lie we told ourselves to survive. But real love, I've learned, is messy. It forgives, it listens, it breathes. Our story wasn't perfect, but it was real. True perfection doesn't come from appearance, control, or silence. It comes from honesty, compassion, and the courage to face what's broken instead of hiding it. The most beautiful homes are not the ones that look flawless, but the ones where love is allowed to be human. People tell you that time heals everything, but they never say how quiet the healing is. For me, it began with silence. The kind that hums inside your skull like an old fluorescent bulb. After the divorce, the house felt like a museum of failed conversations. 2 mugs in the sink, a half-painted wall, and the echo of a man's footsteps that had stopped belonging to me years before. I taught art at the community college in downtown Portland for nearly 20 years. My students came and went. Teenagers with talent, retirees chasing forgotten hobbies, mothers looking for something beyond grocery lists and carpools. After the papers were signed and the house was officially mine, I realized I didn't want to charge people for painting anymore. I wanted to share something gentler. That's how Mindful Painting On was born, free sessions in my studio on Thursday evenings. Art as therapy, I called it. The first night, only 3 people showed up. One of them was Kodaika. He came late, standing in the doorway like he wasn't sure if he'd found the right place. Mid-30s, maybe. Close-cropped hair, shoulders too stiff to ever really relax. "Sorry," he said. "Traffic." His voice had that clipped rhythm soldiers keep even years after service. "Come in," I told him, smiling. No grades, no rush. He nodded and chose the stool near the window, away from everyone else. When I handed him a brush, his hands trembled just slightly. It was familiar. The same tremor I'd watched in my own son years before he shipped off to Afghanistan. That night, I barely painted. I watched Ty mix colors like someone performing surgery. He asked no questions, but his eyes stayed sharp, scanning the room as if it might disappear. When class ended, he lingered behind, wiping his brushes too carefully. "You teach every week?" he asked, and every Thursday, he nodded. "I'll be here." Something about the way he said it felt like a promise. By the 3rd week, Ty had become the quiet center of the room. Other students chatted, laughed, spilled paint. He worked in silence, each stroke deliberate. I started rearranging the tables so he'd sit closer to me. Easier to talk, easier to guide. During cleanup one evening, I asked, "Do you ever paint outside class?" He hesitated. "Sometimes. Helps keep my hands steady." "Do you sell your work?" A small shake of his head. "I just burn them." I froze. "You burn them?" He met my eyes for the first time. "They're not supposed to stay." I didn't ask what that meant. I just nodded as if it made sense. The next week, I brought in lavender tea instead of coffee, hoping to ease the tension that clung to him like smoke. He smiled faintly when I poured it. "Smells like my mom's garden," he said. "What was she like?" I asked. He thought for a long time. "Kind, too kind. She forgave things that shouldn't be forgiven." That line stayed with me for days. It was something my son Tyler might have said before he died. I kept telling myself it was coincidence and that name similarity, the look in his eyes, but the echo was too strong. Sometimes I'd catch myself saying Tyler instead of Ty and quickly correct it. One night after class, he told me he felt watched. "Every time I leave here," he said, "there's a car a few blocks back. Same one, gray sedan, no plates on the front." "Maybe it's just your nerves," I said gently. "Anxiety can make shadows out of nothing." He gave a faint, humorless smile. "Yeah, or maybe the shadows are real." When he left, I jotted the exchange into my teaching notebook. Subject shows recurring paranoia, potential trauma response. I told myself it was for a case study I was writing on veterans and art therapy, though no one had asked me to write one. Weeks blurred. Ty came faithfully until the first snow. Then he stopped. The chair by the window stayed empty, his brushes untouched. At first, I thought he was sick. Then I wondered if he'd finally burned his paintings and moved on. After 2 missed sessions, I called the number on his registration form. Disconnected. The email bounced back. By the 3rd week, the silence felt unbearable. I printed his address from the sign-up sheet and drove there after class. The neighborhood was older, quiet. His street ended near an empty field dotted with weeds. When I pulled up to the house number, my stomach dropped. The porch sagged, windows boarded. A for sale sign hung crookedly from a single nail. I knocked anyway. A woman watering her yard next door looked over. "You looking for someone?" "Yes," I said. Tyson Ward," she frowned. "No one's lived there for years. Place has been empty since, must be 2017. Some vet owned it before, but he passed away. Suicide, I think." My hands started shaking so badly I dropped my car keys. "That can't be right," I whispered. "He was in my class last week." She gave me a sympathetic look and went back inside. I sat in the car for almost an hour, heart pounding. When I finally drove home, I called my therapist, leaving a rambling voicemail. He was real. I'm not imagining him. "Please call me back." That night I couldn't sleep. The studio felt wrong. Canvases leaning like silent witnesses. I walked between them, running my fingers over the dried paint. My eyes caught on one canvas I didn't remember finishing. Ty's face, soft light across his cheek, the same scar above his brow my son had after boot camp. When I turned the lights on, I realized there were dozens of them. All Ty. all slightly different. I didn't go to work for 3 days. Instead, I stayed in the studio cataloging the paintings like evidence. Each was dated in my handwriting, yet I had no memory of some of them. The earliest one, March 2016, was the month my son died overseas. My mind refused to make sense of it. I opened my laptop and began typing notes the way I used to for art critiques. Case study subject Thai. Male, mid-30s, former Marine. Exhibits symptoms of hypervigilance, dissociation, and insomnia. Strong maternal transference present. I wrote for hours, fingers flying, barely aware of time. The words flowed too smoothly, too clinical. It was only when I saw the draft header, Case Report, Evelyn Ward, that something inside me cracked. I stared at the blinking cursor and added, Diagnosis, Dissociative Identity Disorder. Primary alter, Thai Ward, deceased son killed in combat 2016. The air in the studio thickened. My chest felt hollow, as if the truth had been sitting there all along, waiting for me to see it. The therapist I'd been calling, her number wasn't listed anywhere. The voice on the voicemails I'd replayed wasn't hers. It was mine. Morning light spilled through the windows, catching the edges of every portrait. Ty's eyes, my son's eyes, watched me from every wall. I sat at my work table and hit record on my phone. "This is Evelyn Ward," I began. "I think I understand now." I told the story aloud. The divorce, the silence, the loneliness that turned into a voice, a shape, a person. I described how I'd built the class to talk to him again, how every Thursday was a reunion I couldn't admit to myself. Painting was the bridge, and when Ty stopped showing up, it wasn't because he left. It was because the part of me that needed him had finally started to fade. I whispered, "He was real to me. That has to count for something." When my voice broke, I set the phone down and walked to the nearest canvas. I dipped a brush in white paint and began covering his image stroke by stroke until only light remained. For the first time, the silence felt merciful. Later, the therapist's assistant, the one I'd imagined into existence, didn't arrive because she never had. Only the phone kept buzzing on the table, still recording, my unfinished email glowing on the screen. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and endless, like a blank page waiting for color. Grief doesn't disappear when we hide it. It finds a way to speak, even through the cracks of the mind. Sometimes the people we create are the bridges that carry us back to ourselves. Healing begins not when we erase the past, but when we finally face the truth. That love, even when lost, can still paint us whole again. When I think about my childhood home, the first thing I remember isn't the sound of laughter or the smell of Sunday breakfast. It's the porch rails. White paint peeling like sunburned skin. Nails rusting beneath chipped wood. The way the boards creaked when you walked across them. It started falling apart long before the rest of us did. We lived on the east side of Cleveland, in a small 2-story house that always felt one step behind repair. My dad, Eric Henderson, worked at the steel mill back then. Proud, loud, and built like the machines he managed. He used to tell me, a man's hands should show his story. His hands did. They were cracked and scarred and honest. Then one day the mill shut down. Just like that. Generations of men told they weren't needed anymore. Dad didn't talk much after that. He'd still wake up early, pour his coffee, polish his boots like he was getting ready for work. Only there wasn't any. Mom, Teresa started cleaning houses around the neighborhood. Church halls, old apartments, wherever someone needed a mop and didn't ask too many questions about payment. I was 16, old enough to understand the silence between them. I could read moods the way some kids read weather. The clink of a bottle cap meant Dad was drinking again. The long exhale from Mom meant she was too tired to argue. By autumn, the money ran out. Then came the eviction letters. I remember the day one of them arrived. Red stamp on the envelope like a wound. Final warning. Mom cried quietly at the kitchen table, her back turned to me. Dad just stared at the wall. "I'll fix it," he muttered. "I've got plans." Plans. That word became his favorite lie. Dad started spending more time at us Murphy's bar, a dive near the freeway where the lights were always dim enough to pretend it was still afternoon. He'd come home smelling like beer and rain. Mom hated it. "You can't keep drowning yourself, Eric," she said one night while folding laundry. He didn't look up. "You think I like it? You think I wanted this?" "No," she said softly. "But you stopped wanting anything else." I sat on the stairs listening. I used to think if I stayed quiet enough, maybe the storm would pass without noticing me. It didn't. He started taking things, and first small, then noticeable. A wrench here, a car battery there. Said he was fixing things to sell, but nothing ever got fixed. I got a job at the grocery store after school. $8.50 an hour. It wasn't much, but it was something. When I told Dad, he gave a short laugh. $8.50. That's what I used to make in the 70s. It's just temporary, I said. He looked at me like I'd insulted him. Temporary. That's what I said about the mill. A week later, I found his old toolbox missing from the garage. Pawned, probably. Mom tried to hold us together with duct tape and hope. She cooked, cleaned, and prayed to a God I wasn't sure was listening. I'd slip $50 into her purse now and then, pretending she didn't notice. She always did. Once I caught her sitting on the porch, staring at the railing where the paint had started to bubble. She ran her fingers over the wood. "It's funny," she said quietly. "Things rot from the inside first." I didn't ask if she meant the porch or us. It was winter when I finally told him off. He was sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by empty beer cans. The TV flickered blue across his face. "How much they paying you now?" he asked, slurring slightly. $8.50, I said. "I'm saving for community college." He barked out a laugh. "College? You think that's gonna fix us?" "It's not about fixing you," I said, and immediately wished I could take it back. He looked up slowly, eyes bloodshot. "Say that again." Mom stepped into the room. "Eric, please, don't." But he didn't move. He just muttered, "Kid thinks he's better than me. Maybe he is." That was the night I decided to leave. I started packing small, clothes first, then my paycheck stubs. I left $50 in Mom's purse again before slipping out the next morning. A week later, my wallet went missing from the dresser at home when I came back to pick up a few things. On the counter was a note in Dad's handwriting. Needed gas money. Will pay back soon. He never did. I moved in with a friend across town and started working double shifts. My hands smelled like cardboard and bleach most days, but at least I wasn't angry all the time. Mom called every Sunday. She'd talk about weather, neighbors, the dog next door, never about him. When I asked how she was, she'd say, "Fine enough." That was her new phrase for survival. Months turned into years. I finished high school, got a small apartment, started community college like I'd planned. I didn't visit much. Every time I drove by the old house, it looked worse. Porch sagging, blinds drawn. Then came the call. "Are you Caleb Henderson?" the nurse asked. "Your father was admitted this morning, cirrhosis, it's serious." I didn't even know what to feel, guilt maybe, or just exhaustion. But I went. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and endings. He looked smaller than I remembered, skin pale, lips cracked. "Didn't think you'd come," he said weakly. "I figured I'd face this," I said. "You always told me men should face things." He gave a thin smile. "Guess you were better at it than me." We talked about nothing important, football, weather, people who'd moved away. But under it all was everything we didn't say. "I'm sorry. I loved you. You hurt us." He died 2 days later. After the funeral, I went back to the house. It had been sold to cover debts. The porch was gone completely, torn down, replaced by dirt and weeds. The mailbox still had our name faded across it. Henderson. I stood there a long time, staring at the space where the railing used to be. That porch had held so many versions of us, the good, the broken, the trying. Maybe that's what family is, a structure you keep repairing until you can't anymore. I reached into my wallet to slip the hospital bracelet inside. The same wallet he'd once stolen from. The inner seam had a small tear where the bills used to be. It was empty now, but somehow lighter. Because sometimes survival isn't about what you keep. It's about what you learn to let go of. I turned away from the house as the wind picked up. For the first time, I didn't look back. The first thing I remember about my father was the sound of his boots. Heavy, deliberate, always moving somewhere I wasn't allowed to follow. Our house sat at the edge of a long wheat field, far enough from town that the nights felt endless and the stars pressed down like watchful eyes. The wind made the stalks whisper, and sometimes late at night I'd swear I could hear them echoing his footsteps. Dad Daniel worked nights. That's what he said anyway. He'd leave after dinner, a flashlight in his pocket, a thermos of coffee in hand, and come home before dawn smelling of smoke, gasoline, and something sharp I couldn't name. When I asked where he went, he'd say, "Just work, Lily, don't you worry about it." Mom always looked down when he said that. Our house was small but spotless. Mom kept it that way. Clean sheets, shining floors, curtains drawn tight. She said it made us look respectable. She didn't have friends. People from town stopped visiting after a while. They said Dad had a temper. I never saw it, not really. Just flashes. His jaw tightening, his hands clenching when someone mentioned the past. When I was 10, I started noticing things. Locked drawers. A shed behind the barn with a padlock the size of my fist. Phone calls late at night. Once, I woke up to the sound of my parents arguing. "You said you'd stop," Mom whispered. His reply came low and rough. "It's the only way to keep them off our backs." Them. I didn't know who they were, but I started to feel them everywhere. In the way Dad double-bolted the doors. In the way Mom's eyes darted toward every passing car. Fear lived in our house like another member of the family. By 13, curiosity became a habit I couldn't shake. That shed behind the barn, it called to me like a secret. One afternoon while Dad was asleep and Mom was hanging laundry, I snuck around back. The lock was old but sturdy. I tugged on it, pressed my ear to the door and heard humming. A generator, maybe. I didn't understand. Later that week, I saw him come home with a duffel bag. He went straight to the shed. Through the crack between the doors, I saw something shiny. A metal box, stacks of envelopes, a small black gun. My stomach dropped. I backed away before he turned around. That night, I tried asking Mom, "What does Dad do, really?" I said. She froze, her hand tightening around the dish towel. "He's working to protect us," she said finally. "That's all you need to know." But the more she said nothing, the more I needed to know everything. It happened in late August. The wheat was high, the night still and heavy. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of the back door creaking open. I looked out my window and saw Dad walking into the field, a can in one hand, a small bundle in the other. I slipped out barefoot, the ground cool beneath my feet. The stalks brushed against my legs as I followed, heart hammering. He stopped at the far edge of the field where a small fire burned. He was tossing papers into it, photographs, IDs, receipts, things that disappeared in flashes of orange. His lips moved like he was praying, but I could hear words. Names. Names I didn't recognize. "Dad?" I whispered. He turned slowly. His face wasn't angry, it was exhausted. "Lily," he said, voice cracked. "You shouldn't be here. What are you doing?" He looked at the fire, then at me. "Cleaning up," he said. "Trying to keep you safe." The flames flickered against his eyes, and for the first time I saw fear there, not of being caught, but of losing us. The next morning I woke to sirens. Blue and red lights painted the walls of my bedroom. I ran outside, barefoot again, to see police cars lined up by the barn. Mom stood on the porch, crying into her hands. Dad was sitting on the steps, wrists bound, head bowed. They opened the shed. The officers carried out boxes. Stolen goods, fake IDs, bags of cash, and things I couldn't bear to look at. One officer muttered, "Been at this a while, huh?" Dad didn't argue, didn't resist. He just looked at me, calm and hollow, and said, "You keep your mother safe, you hear?" When they led him to the car, he didn't look back once. We sold the house within a month. Mom couldn't stand the sight of the wheat field anymore. "Too many ghosts," she said. We moved to a small town 2 hours away where no one knew our names. She worked in a diner. I went to school and pretended we were normal. Years passed before she talked about him again. One night over coffee, she finally said, "Your father thought he was protecting us. He believed every lie he told." I nodded. I understood. Fear had eaten him from the inside, twisting everything he touched. I still dream of that night sometimes, the fire, the look in his eyes. It wasn't hate. It was despair disguised as love. Now I'm grown, living in a small apartment miles from that field. Some nights when the wind's right, I swear I can still smell the wheat burning. And I wonder if Dad ever understood that love, when poisoned by fear, stops being love at all. Fear can make even the most loving person lose their way. True protection doesn't come from control or secrecy. It comes from honesty, trust, and the courage to face what frightens us instead of burying it in the dark. Love built on fear will always burn, no matter how hard we try to hide the fire. When people talk about childhood, they usually mention laughter, summer sprinklers, birthday candles, school plays. Mine was measured instead by the sound of gravel under tires. When my father's truck pulled into the driveway, Everything inside our house went still. Dayton, Ohio was where it all started. A plain street of modest homes and overgrown yards. The kind of place where neighbors waved from their porches but never stepped closer. My father, David Keller, ruled our house the way a storm rules the sky, unpredictable, deafening, and dangerous. He worked at a machine shop on the edge of town and came home smelling of oil, sweat, and cheap whiskey. When the door slammed, Mom's eyes darted to the clock. Mine went to the floor. Every evening played out the same way. A clatter of dishes, the scrape of his chair against the tile, and the stretch of silence before the first insult landed. Mom had learned the art of surviving quietly. She timed dinners perfectly, made sure the lights were dim, the TV muted, and I spoke only when asked. "Keep your head down," she'd whisper. "He gets worse if you fight back." The rules were simple but heavy. Don't laugh too loud, don't contradict, don't look him in the eye when he's drinking. Still, rules never stopped the shouting. Sometimes it was about bills, other times nothing at all. His anger didn't need a reason. It just needed a target. When he broke something, a plate, a chair, once even the radio, Mom would sweep it up in silence. I'd help, pretending not to notice her trembling hands or the redness around her eyes. Then, as if nothing had happened, he'd flick on the TV and say, "We're still a family, aren't we?" I used to think every home was like ours. That fear was just another room you had to learn to live in. By the time I turned 16, I understood that my father's apologies were part of the cycle. After every outburst came the charm. He'd buy flowers, promise change, even take us out for ice cream like we were normal people. For a day or two, I almost believed him. But calm in our house was never peace. It was the quiet before the next storm. Mom started keeping small stashes of money hidden. $20 bills tucked into the lining of her purse. Loose change sealed in coffee cans beneath the sink. I knew what it meant, a backup plan. A way out. I got a part-time job at the local grocery store and told Dad it was for gas money. Really, it was my own escape fund. I worked late whenever I could just to stay away. The store's hum of fluorescent lights felt safer than home. One night after closing, I came home to the smell of burnt meat and shouting. Dad stood in the kitchen, drunk and red-faced. "Can't even cook a damn meal," he spat. The roast lay blackened on the counter. "It was an accident," Mom said softly. "An accident?" He stepped forward, knocking over a chair. "You ruin everything." That was the first time I stepped between them. My heart hammered as I shouted, "Leave her alone." For a second he froze, shocked I'd spoken. Then his hand struck out so fast I didn't see it coming. I tasted blood. After that, nothing was the same. The bruise on my cheek became the truth neither of us could ignore. Mom's eyes changed. They weren't afraid anymore, just determined. She said, "Next time we go." The next time came sooner than I expected. It was a Friday in February, the air brittle and cold. Dad came home later than usual, stumbling through the door with rage in his voice. Something about losing overtime pay, about how the world was against him. He smashed a beer bottle on the counter, glass scattering across the tile. Mom didn't flinch. She grabbed my wrist and whispered, "Get your things." We packed quietly, a duffel each, cash, a few clothes, my old photo album. When Dad passed out on the couch, we slipped into the night. The cold bit through my jacket, but the freedom in that first breath was worth it. We drove east for 3 hours before stopping at a small town called Milford. The streets were empty, the storefronts closed. We found a cheap rental, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, creaky floors but safe locks. Mom said, "We'll start over." For weeks we did. She found work at a diner. I picked up shifts at a gas station. We learned to laugh again, slowly, like muscles remembering how to move. But safety, I learned, isn't just about distance. It's about what follows you. The first time I heard the gravel crunch outside our new house, I froze. It was late, maybe 2 in the morning, and the sound was too deliberate, too familiar. I peeked through the blinds. Headlights glowed faintly at the end of the road, then disappeared. When I told Mom, she tried to stay calm. "It's probably nothing," she said, but her voice trembled. A week later, muddy footprints appeared on the porch. They led up to the door, then stopped. No knock, no note. Just dirt and silence. We called the police. They searched the area, found tire tracks, but nothing else. The officer, young and polite, said, "Could have been kids messing around." Mom nodded, but her hands shook as she locked the door behind him. After that, the car started appearing. A black sedan with tinted windows parked across the street. Some nights it idled for hours, engine low and steady. I'd stand by the window, heart pounding, and see a cigarette ember flicker inside. I couldn't see his face, but I didn't need to. Dad didn't have to be visible to be present. He was everywhere. In the sound of gravel, in the echo of anger, in the way Mom still jumped when a door slammed too hard. 2 years have passed since we left Dayton. We've changed towns twice, changed phone numbers, even changed our last name on the lease. But some nights I still wake to that phantom sound. Tires on gravel, slow and certain. Mom says we can't live in fear forever. She's right, but fear doesn't leave easily. It's like smoke. Even when the fire's out, it lingers in your lungs. We've built a life, though. I'm 22 now, studying auto mechanics at the community college. Mom laughs more, even dances when old country songs play on the radio. Sometimes she says he didn't win, you know. I nod, but I still check the locks twice. The last letter from the Dayton police came months ago. They said David Keller was missing. No forwarding address, no sightings. Part of me hopes he's gone for good. Another part knows men like him never really disappear. They just fade into the edges of memory, waiting for a crack to step through. Still, I keep living. Every sunrise feels like a small rebellion. Every laugh from Mom feels like proof that the cycle can be broken. Maybe that's enough. Abuse doesn't end when you walk away. It ends when you stop letting fear define you. Freedom isn't only distance, it's the courage to live despite the shadows that follow. Healing means choosing peace every day, even when the gravel still crunches in your dreams. People say your 16th birthday is supposed to be unforgettable. Mine was, just not in the way anyone hoped. It started out perfect, at least on the surface. My mom had been planning it for weeks. A backyard strung with fairy lights, a table stacked with pizzas and soda, and a cake big enough to feed everyone in my junior class. She kept saying, 16 only comes once, kiddo. It has to be special. I smiled and pretended to care about the decorations, but deep down, I just wanted everyone to have a good time. I wanted to see her relax for once, to see my dad laugh without checking his phone every 5 minutes. By 6 o'clock, the house buzzed with noise. Friends filled the living room, spilling into the kitchen, music blasting through the speakers. Mom fluttered around like a hummingbird, fixing snacks and adjusting streamers that didn't need adjusting. Dad manned the grill outside, beer in hand, acting like everything was fine, though I caught him glancing at Mom a few times, something unspoken hanging between them. Then Ryan showed up. He wasn't supposed to be there. My older cousin, Mom's nephew, had been out of the family picture for years. The last I'd heard, he'd dropped out of college and was sorting things out. When I opened the door and saw him standing there with that half smile, holding a crumpled gift bag, I didn't know whether to be happy or confused. "Hey, birthday kid," he said, his voice easy but tired. "Didn't think I'd miss this, did you?" Mom froze when she saw him. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she pulled it back on like a mask. "Ryan," she said tightly, "you didn't say you were coming." "Surprise," he said. His eyes flicked around the room, landing on Dad. The air shifted. I didn't know it then, but that look carried years of unfinished business. The night went on, but something underneath the laughter began to rot. At first, it was little things. The way Mom's hands shook while cutting the cake, the quiet conversation in the kitchen when she thought no one was listening. I caught fragments. "Not here. You said next week. Ryan, please, not tonight." When I peeked in, Ryan was leaning against the counter, arms crossed. My dad stood beside Mom, jaw tight. When they noticed me, all three smiled like they'd rehearsed it. I didn't push it. Teenagers know when to disappear. Back in the living room, my friends were singing Sweet 16 off-key, waving their phones like lighters. I laughed along, but my stomach twisted. Ryan rejoined the crowd, pretending to be part of the fun. He gave me a wrapped box, light, small. "Open it later," he said quietly. "When things calm down." His tone made my skin prickle. "What's in it?" "Something you should know about your family," he said. Then with a grin that didn't reach his eyes, "Don't look so scared, kid. It's just a gift. Mom called us to take photos before candles." Ryan hung back, watching her. The lights dimmed for the song, everyone clapping and singing, and for a moment the world felt normal. I made a wish I can't even remember now. Something dumb about freedom, probably. Then right after I blew out the candles, the power went out. The first few seconds were filled with laughter. Someone yelling, "Nice one, Mrs. K. Great timing." But the laughter died fast. The dark pressed heavy and close. I heard glass clink somewhere, then break. Then Mom's voice and sharp, scared. "Ryan, don't—" Her words cut off with a gasp. My heart hammered. Someone near me whispered, "What's happening?" Another voice, "Find a flashlight." My friend Emily's hand found mine in the dark. Then a crash, the sound of metal scraping tile. When the lights flickered back on, chaos exploded. Ryan stood near the kitchen archway, a knife glinting in his hand. His face was pale, sweating, eyes wide. "You thought you could hide it forever?" he shouted. "After everything I did for you?" Dad lunged, shouting, "Put it down, Ryan." Chairs toppled. People screamed. The air smelled of burnt wax and fear. Someone knocked the cake table over. Candles hit the rug, flames catching fast. I remember Emily pulling me toward the back door, yelling, "Run!" I looked back once, Ryan trembling, knife still raised, Dad between him and Mom. Then the power went again. The rest was smoke and sirens. We stood barefoot in the backyard, the cold November grass soaking our feet. The house glowed orange through the windows, smoke curling up like ghosts. Neighbors gathered, whispering. Someone must have called the cops because soon red and blue lights painted the yard. Mom was shaking so hard she could barely speak. "He said he just wanted to talk," she kept repeating. "He said he wouldn't hurt anyone." Dad's face was streaked with soot, his shirt torn. "Where is he?" I asked. He didn't answer. The police rushed in. Firefighters doused the living room, foam spilling across the porch. The smell of burnt sugar and plastic clung to everything. Later, one of the officers told us Ryan had disappeared through the back alley. They found the knife, but not him. In the days after, reporters showed up, flashing cameras, asking if I felt traumatized. My parents refused interviews. They barely spoke to each other. The house smelled like smoke for weeks, no matter how much we cleaned. I never opened Ryan's gift. I threw it away with the ashes of the decorations. Some secrets didn't deserve light. It's been 10 years. Every November, I still wake up to the faint scent of smoke, even when there isn't any. Birthdays are small now. Dinner with friends, maybe a quiet walk. I don't like candles. I don't like surprises. My parents split 2 years after that night. Mom says it was inevitable. Dad says it started long before Ryan's visit. I think it started with whatever secret they shared that made him come in the first place. Last month, a detective called. Ryan's body had been found in another state, dead for years. No foul play, just a man who ran out of road. When I hung up, I didn't cry. I just sat in my car and stared at the steering wheel, feeling empty. That night, I finally lit a single candle on my kitchen counter. Not for celebration, for peace. The flame flickered, steady and small, and I realized something. Even after the worst fires, light still finds its way back. Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones carrying the matches. Family can protect or destroy, depending on the secrets they keep. But survival means learning to rebuild, to find light again without pretending the fire never happened. Because even when the party ends in smoke, the strength to keep living is its own kind of celebration. When I think back to that year, it always starts with the rain. It wasn't a gentle kind of rain either. It was the kind that soaked through your shoes and made the world look tired. We'd just moved into number 42 South Bridge Road, a small 2-story house with flaking paint and a sagging porch. To my 11-year-old eyes, it looked like an adventure. To my dad, it looked like defeat. Mom called it a fresh start. She tried to sound cheerful when she said it, but her smile never reached her eyes. Dad had been laid off from the plant a few months before, and since then he'd been different. Not angry at first, just quiet, like something inside him had broken and he didn't know how to fix it. The first few weeks were all about pretending. We unpacked boxes and painted the kitchen a faded yellow. Mom said felt warm. Dad sat by the window most days, drinking coffee that eventually turned into beer. He'd watch the drizzle streak down the glass like it was something personal. At night, I'd lie in bed and listen to the pipes creak. Sometimes I'd hear my parents whispering in the kitchen. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the weight of them, the kind that filled the air like smoke. One Thursday evening, I came downstairs to find Dad sitting in the dark, TV light flickering on his face. Mom stood by the counter, still in her care home uniform, exhaustion pulling her down. "You didn't eat?" she asked him. He didn't look up. No clean plates. "You could have washed one, love." He finally looked at her, eyes bloodshot. "You saying I don't do enough around here?" I froze halfway down the stairs. The edge in his voice scared me. "Nobody said that," she answered softly. "You just think it." After that night, silence became the third person in the house. By summer, Dad had stopped pretending. Every morning, he'd sit at the kitchen table with a can of lager and an empty stare. He didn't look for work anymore. "The world's gone to hell," he'd say. "No one wants a man who's worked with his hands." Mom picked up extra shifts, leaving before dinner most nights. I learned to make beans on toast, sometimes eggs if we had any left. Dad would watch me cook, eyes heavy. "You're the man of the house now, huh?" he'd mutter. I never knew if it was a compliment or a warning. One night I brought home a permission slip for a field trip, $25 to visit some caves. "It's for geography," I said, careful not to sound too hopeful. Dad laughed bitterly. $25 to look at rocks? I used to work 16-hour shifts for that. He crushed his can and tossed it toward the sink. "You think money grows on trees?" I didn't answer. Later, Mom found me in my room, eyes red. She kissed my forehead and signed the slip anyway. "Don't tell your dad," she whispered. But secrets never lasted long in that house. He found the bank statement a week later. I still remember the sound, his voice booming down the hallway like thunder. "You went behind my back." "It's just a school trip, Colin," Mom shouted. "You made me look like a fool." I sat at the top of the stairs, hugging my knees, listening to things fall and break. That night, I heard my mother cry for the first time. Afterward, the air in the house felt different, heavy. Even the walls seemed to hold their breath. Dad started disappearing for hours, sometimes all day. When he came back, he smelled of cigarettes and rain. "Just sorting things," he'd say. Mom found the envelope one morning. Amount overdue, $200. She confronted him, and the argument started all over again. That afternoon, I came home from school to find her sitting on the stairs, face pale. "Dad's gone," she said. "He left a note." I unfolded it carefully. His handwriting was shaky. "Can't take this anymore. Tell Jamie I tried." They found him sleeping in his car near the factory 2 days later. The police said he wasn't drunk, not high, just lost. When he came home, he didn't apologize. He just sat back at the kitchen table like nothing had happened. Mom didn't say much either. She stayed because leaving took strength she didn't have anymore. We started living around him, not with him. I'd leave early for school, stay late when I could. When I was home, I learned how to move quietly, how to keep from waking something dangerous. One night he looked at me and said, "You blame me, don't you?" I didn't know what to say. He was my dad. I wanted to hate him, but I couldn't. He laughed, a sound more tired than cruel. "You will one day." Years later, I walked down Southbridge Road again. The house still stood there, leaning into the wind. The paint peeled, the garden wild. I stopped at the gate, hearing echoes of my childhood. The clink of a beer can, the hum of the fridge, the soft sound of my mother's voice trying to hold a family together. I realized then that fear doesn't always come from shouting or fists. Sometimes it comes from silence, the kind that seeps into you until you forget what normal sounds like. My father died a few years after that, in a small apartment by himself. Mom moved south and finally found peace in a little house with flowers in the yard. I visit her sometimes, and we don't talk much about him. Some stories don't need retelling. But sometimes, when it rains, I think about that chipped front door and the boy who once thought it was a castle. I think about how a home can hold both love and fear, how both can live under one roof and how silence can be its own kind of scream.